You are listening to the Two and Out CFL podcast, a proud member of the Canadian Football Podcast Network.
Third in the weekly standings this week and third overall now for the year in our group. So, I'm pretty happy with that.
Does that cure your hangover a little bit?
No. These leftover chicken nuggets should, though.
Grab some poutine and a double-double. It's time for the Two and Out CFL podcast.
Now they have to kick it out, and they do!
Every week, Travis Currah.
Does anybody still care about this podcast?
And Brazilian Ty.
Hunters are people, too.
Talk fantasy football, bring you the latest in CFL news, and sprinkle in a little bit of nonsense.
Are you kidding? This is unbelievable!
Ready, set, hunt!
And welcome to the Two and Out CFL podcast. Travis Currah and Brazilian Ty. We have a lot to get to, so quickly, we got to mention that Two and Out is now a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. Look at that, another group that's willing to work with us, Ty.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, me anyway.
Yeah. I tend to not be invited to these meetings for reasons that are pretty self-explanatory.
Let's get right to the news.
In the Huddle with Currah and Ty on the Two and Out podcast.
Okay, breaking news. I actually found a store that carries a hat big enough for my head.
That's not true. You're lying.
No, dude. Believe me, man. So apparently I'm a size 8. And that's about as big as a cowboy hat comes. There are plenty of stores in Red Deer that don't even carry size 8. So I was lucky enough to find one.
You would have had to buy a 7 3/4 and cut slits on the side of it to make it fit.
I'm just so happy. And I know we're going to get to the news item that everybody wants to talk about. It was Jacob Trouba, finally. Arbitration happens. That's what we're here to talk about, isn't it?
Well, I thought it was the Tony Washington story.
Oh, wow. I thought we were going to talk about the Open as well.
Tiger did have a real good day or a real good weekend, just couldn't put it all together.
Yes or no? Is he ever going to win another major?
This would be the only one that he could win. It would have to be a British Open, but I don't think he does.
All right, let's really talk about what everybody is talking about. I think if the Ticats were going to trade Johnny Manziel, I think we all knew it was going to be to Montreal. But Ty, they paid a steep price.
Yeah, they're going to lose 2 starting offensive linemen, and that could leave a hole for sure. But they think that their younger guys are ready to step in and take those positions. As for Montreal, what they gave up, that's a haul for Hamilton. Getting Westerman and those draft picks could be real huge for them. This trade is we'll have to see what the draft picks turn out to be, but I don't see anybody really winning this trade. I mean, Montreal fills a hole. Hamilton does get better. Both teams got better from this trade. It's just going to have to work. We'll have to wait and see how it works out.
You know what? I'm going to say that Hamilton is the winner of this trade right now. They traded for a quarterback that they do not know what he's going to do in the CFL. And on top of that, he could be jetting after next year. And that is a big deal because the Owls do not have a first-round pick next year. They did give it up for Tyler Johnstone. So essentially, we can almost call him their first-round pick for next year because he's already starting at left tackle, a Canadian. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with them giving up that, but they also gave up their first-round pick in 2020. They gave up the first-round pick in 2021. Canadian talent wins in this league, and we've talked about already how much Canadian depth the Tiger Cats have. It seems that they might be getting even more from this trade because they also get Jamal Westerman, who has been an absolute beast at defensive end for the last few years. They could potentially be starting actually 2 Canadian defensive ends with Justin Capicotti there as well.
Which, if you can do that and get another American into a skill position, that's just added incentive to be able to want to do this. And like you said, trading Masoli, they don't know what he's going to be. Montreal's got to do something. They got to take a flyer on him because their quarterback situation right now is it's not good. And this is one way to fix it. Maybe he's probably going to start in the next couple weeks, and we'll actually get to see what he can do. But yeah, Montreal giving up all these draft picks just isn't making a lot of sense to me.
And they also give up Chris Williams, who has not done much this year, but that just takes another pass catcher away from Johnny Manziel. Mm-hmm. He's got B.J. Cunningham. He's got Ernest Jackson, who this season has really struggled. So it might as well say he only has B.J. Cunningham right now. He does not have anybody to throw to in Montreal at all.
No, and it's when you got two guys that are really the only viable options, and they're traded away. They're one guy who's a legitimate deep threat that just had nobody to get him the ball. It's almost like by filling one hole, they've created another, and that'll happen in trades a lot. But when it's a hole like that, the quarterback situation it improves if he can play. We don't know that yet, so they might just end up having the same problem, but have added to that problem now. So it's going to be. It could be a total crapshoot for them because even if Manziel plays, who's he going to throw the ball to? I don't know. It's weird.
They play Edmonton this Thursday. I can't see him getting into that game. Maybe he, I don't know, gets into the game. I can't see him starting though.
No.
2 days of practice. That's just throwing him to the wolves.
Oh, absolutely. But at the same time, we've seen Montreal do some weird stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not going to say that it would shock me, but at the same time, it would shock me. The following week, 8 days after Thursday, they are in Montreal with guess who coming to town? The Hamilton Tiger Cats. I could see him starting that game.
Oh, that's a distinct possibility. It might be like the Chris Strevler method that they use in Winnipeg, where he's not going to have the full playbook. But
of course,
you get to see what he can do. In a new offense. We haven't seen him play yet. So other than preseason, and yeah, that would be so poetic if his first start comes against Hamilton.
And I really hope Kavis made this decision on his own and wasn't told by somebody higher up. The Wettenhalls in the organization, it has been talked about for the last decade, and it kind of screams of that.
Yeah, they like to get their fingers on, make sure their fingerprints are all over this team, it seems. They can't just sit back and let the GM do his job and, build a team. And we've seen it since Calvillo's been gone that, this team has been in disarray. They haven't been a consistently good football team for years now. So, and that if the owners are going to meddle like they've known to do in Montreal, it doesn't bode well.
Elsewhere, there's been a lot of talk of Terrell Owens the last little bit. The Eskimos have actually dropped him from their neg list. Do you see him signing anywhere at this point?
I don't. We talked about it last week. He's 44. The game is so much faster paced. With the 20-second play clock. I just don't see it.
And I know a lot of people saying, "Oh, I'll sign him in Toronto, get tickets sold and things like that." That's a temporary solution. What you need to do in Toronto is to get them to care about the CFL. I know that is you got a long way to go there, especially with how the Argos are looking this year. We will talk about them, but they are not looking like a good team at all. So signing a 44-year-old may help you for 2 weeks. It's not going to help you going into the future here with the Argos in Toronto. And I guess all of this mentioned, Manziel, Owens, the NFL, The CFL has voted to bring back the NFL window for teams, and I think this is big heading into CBA negotiations here. Basically, players are going to get a window in the offseason to allow to work out for NFL teams, and if they get a contract, they're allowed to go. And I am 100% okay with that. And this gets rid of, I hope, these one-year contracts that guys only want to sign, in case they have NFL opportunities come up in the offseason. But as of right now, any players under contract now, this NFL window will not be open to them. But contracts signed after sometime in August, they will have the NFL window, and I think it's a good thing.
It for sure is. It'll give guys they'll be able to get some term, and have a little bit of a guarantee that at least they're going to be they'll be able to play football somewhere, and then that way they can go down and try out, because there's guys that want to play in the NFL. That's why they came up, they were there, didn't make it, come up here, try to get some film, try to get some gameplay, maybe work out, improve. They can try to go back. This just gives them another opportunity to do that. And like you said, if they don't make it, then they can come back, and that allows teams to kind of, I don't know, build a brand is not maybe the word I'm looking for, but you can have a player under contract. You can sign him to a 3 or 4 year deal. He might not be here for the whole thing if he gets an offer, but you're not signing these 1 year deals year in, year out, and guys moving around a bunch.
Well, that's another thing. You got to get fans to care about their team, and it's not as much of an issue in the West, and basically it only seems like maybe 3 fan bases where it's not an issue right now, and that would be Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. Yeah, and I guess you could argue for Hamilton and Ottawa as well, but when players are coming in and out every single year, the fans don't get to know their team, and they don't get to know their players and really start to care and have a favorite player on the team. They just like the team, but when they can get to know the players and make a connection with them, that is big to keeping long-term fans, I think.
It definitely is. And, look at the turnover that BC had on their roster this season. Like that's incredible. And, it was already a little tough to get fans in BC. With the stadium they have, it looks way worse than it actually is, probably.
Yeah, but, I think so.
When you're losing half your roster, people don't know who's on their team anymore. It's almost the first 6 weeks are a learning process again, because you gotta learn who everybody is again. So that's kind of tough. And I think a little bit of roster stability, I think that this could possibly bring, with guys being willing to sign longer term, could help the attendance aspect in a lot of places.
Before we talk about Week 6, we got to say thank you to ATB. They are a sponsor of the Alberta Podcast Network, and I know you were a coach in minor hockey once upon a time, Ty. It's hard to believe, but you were, weren't you?
Assistant coach.
But minor hockey sponsors are needed all across Alberta to help it go, isn't it? And ATB, that is exactly what they do. They want to help your team, whether it's Tom Thumb, Pee Wee, or all the way up to the pros. ATB helps sponsor teams across Alberta. And I know it's a football podcast, but in September, a lot of kids going to be playing hockey again. A lot of adults going to be playing hockey again when the ice time ramps up again. So atb.com/hockey. Check them out, and they can help sponsor your team here in Alberta.
Join 2 and Out for CFL Fantasy and CFL Pick'em, and show Currah and Ty what you got.
They are who we thought they were.
Just click cflfantasy.tsn.ca.
Enough from talking about it. There has to be consequences.
And pick'em.cfl.ca.
All right, we start with the first game of the week. It is the Saskatchewan Roughriders getting by the Hamilton Tiger Cats 31-20. This was a big touchdown from Marcus Thigpen.
He gives to Thigpen. Big hole. 35, 45, 50. Midfield goes Thigpen. He's going to score. Is he? 15, 10, 5. Touchdown, Marcus Thigpen. It is an 80-yard touchdown run to open the second half.
Now, after Saskatchewan lost to Montreal, fans all over the CFL thought that the Riders were going to go on probably an 0-6 run here, especially with the way Hamilton looked at the time. I think a lot thought they were going to lose 2 straight to Hamilton, but now that they swept the series with Hamilton, man, things look all of a sudden a lot more positive in Regina.
Yeah, just a bit. Hey, I picked Hamilton both weeks, and I'll eat crow. I was wrong. The stuff that's going on with their roster, and guys playing the positions they are, I don't get how they're winning football games, but Chris Jones is somehow making this work.
It looked grim early in the game. Of course, the Riders only dressed 5 offensive linemen, and the leader of that offensive line, Brendan Labatt, got hurt on the opening drive. He left the game. He went to the locker room for a bit. At that time, Eddie Steele covered on the offensive line until Labatt came back, and when Labatt came back, he played unreal. He had an amazing game. Actually, that offensive line had their best game of the entire season. And Brendan Labatt, I think the Riders lost some leadership in the offseason with Bakari Grant and Chad Owens. And they lost some of that veteran leadership. But Brendan Labatt really stepped up basically all week long, because they had some bad days at practice. I think it was Tuesday. Brendan Labatt came out and said, hey, our practice habits are absolute garbage, and then he backed it up in the game. I don't know what he did in the locker room. I don't know if he put some numbing agent in there or what, but he was able to get back onto the field, and he backed up what he said during the week at practice. So, I mean, if you got to take a player of the game for the Riders, it is probably Brendan Labatt. I wish there were more highlights of offensive linemen I could play on the podcast, but he backed up what he was saying and stepped up as a leader for this team.
He definitely did. And I think a big part of him coming back in that game was knowing the roster situation with only dressing the 5-0 linemen. Eddie Steele was serviceable. He played good. When he had to cover, I wouldn't want him in there for a full game, but emergency situation. But I think he's like, I need to get back into this game somehow, some way. I got to fight through this. And just leader on and off the field, and like you said with the practice stuff, and he let his team have it, and then backed it up. Came back in this game, and the whole offensive line I thought played really well on Thursday night. But Labatt coming back was huge.
Now, Rider fans are really funny. During the Durant era, when he went through a rough stretch, fans would call, get him on the sideline, let him watch a few series with Drew Willie in there. And then the Riders were doing that, switching quarterbacks, and then the whole fan base got mad again.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of hypocrisy in there, but it almost seemed like the Riders listened to what everybody was saying here. They were doing things that helped the offensive line. They were throwing screens. They and you know what? They did change Brandon Bridge. I think it was 2 series in for Watford, but he played the entire second half, and I think that was really big for his confidence.
I totally agree. At some point he's got to be left in a game to work through some stuff, and and if he can do that, because every quarterback's gonna have a rough patch at some point in the game. If he can work through that, and then start making plays, and know that he has the confidence from his coach, or that his coach has the confidence in him to leave him in and let him play a game. I think he's not looking over his shoulder. He's not worried to make a mistake here or there. And it makes him a better quarterback if he's going to be able to take the reins and play an entire game.
Yeah, and that was big for Bridge being the quarterback of this team going forward until Collaros comes back, or maybe the rest of the season. Who knows what's going to happen with that situation. But he only throws for 165 yards, but 17 of 22, had a touchdown, had some runs. But the key is no turnovers here, and that was huge for this offense.
That is massive. He is liable to make a bad decision, and he's young. He's still learning. This is only his third start, so or third start this year. So, I mean, like, he's got a handful of starts. It's a really small sample size, but, he has turned the ball over. He shows a propensity to do that. That's going to.
He's had a lot of dropped interceptions too. So
that's a lot of luck. But eventually those, it's either going to turn around or it's not. With the interception wise, but I mean, the more he learns, the more he gets to play. Read defenses more and more and more. Those interceptions should take care of themselves.
Yeah, and I thought they helped him a lot with the screenplays. And I know some are saying, what are you doing with these screenplays? But they're high percentage plays. That
set up the Naaman Roosevelt touchdown.
Oh, and you saw it. It was absolutely beautiful. They faked the screen to Shaq Evans. Naaman Roosevelt is uncovered and untouched for a touchdown. So that's what happens when you commit to something like that. But it helped the quarterback get his confidence, make some completions, and it helped the offensive line and the running game for the Riders in this one. They had over, 200 yards on the ground, and it helped that they used the right players in the right situation. Jerome Messam, the hammer, comes in the fourth quarter at the end of the game and wraps it up. I was happy that I had Marcus Thigpen, but he only had the one carry. It was an 80-yard touchdown. It could have been a lot worse fantasy-wise, but I think Trey Mason has his best game as a Rider as well with 51 yards on the ground. It just seemed like they used their running backs properly here.
Yeah, like Jerome Messam comes out of the bullpen, so to speak, and, closes this one out. He's a guy that is going to run between the tackles. He's going to kill time. He's going to protect the football. And Thigpen is more of your speed. He can get outside, and, an 80-yard rushing touchdown is, really nice to see. He finishes with 15.6 points, and, that really all of that came from that one play.
Yeah.
And Trey Mason, 51 yards. It's respectable as well. And like you said, they had over 200 yards rushing, which, especially in the CFL, you don't see too often.
As for the Ticats side of the ball, now, this changes everything because there were a lot wondering, are we going to see Johnny Manziel? Should he have been in this game when it was out of reach? Should they think about starting him a little while here? Well, now that's not an option. So I think that has to take a lot of pressure off of Jeremiah Mazzoli's shoulders. Now, if you talk to the guy, it seems like this stuff doesn't bug him. He looks as cold as ice, but you have to think it was on his mind a little bit, but now it's just not there anymore. This is Jeremiah Mazzoli's team. He does go 20 of 28, 184 yards and an interception. He also had 24 rush yards on 3 carries. You know what? I don't think he played horribly, but credit has to be there for the Rough Rider defense as well, because it's not like he was just going up against the practice team here.
No, and like we've said it before, that front seven on the Riders can create a lot of havoc in a team's backfield. Pressures get Mazzoli moving around, and He did make some throws that, had no business being caught that should have been intercepted. Basically jumping backwards and just throwing it into an area that's, should have been fully Riders, but comes up with a catch. So there's a little bit of luck to that there. But, falls short from setting a new record. But, he didn't play terribly. But that Rider front seven was just creating so many problems for him.
And I'm going to say it now. I think Jalen Saunders is the better pure receiver than Brandon Banks. And he had 67 yards and 5 catches. Saunders did. But where Banks excels is when they're able to get him in space, when they throw screens to him, and the volume, the amount of targets he's been getting the last little while has been incredible here. But it's not like you sit there and you think Brandon Banks is such an incredible route runner. He's a smart receiver. No, it's all about his speed. And Ed Gainey was able to shut him down in this game. 3 catches and 25 yards. And let's face it, when things don't go Brandon's way, he starts to pout a little bit, and we definitely saw it here.
Yeah, and that's not a good look.
No.
That's not what you want from a guy that you would hope would be somewhat of a leader on this team. The ball, you're not going to get the ball on every play. And just because you think you're open, your quarterback is going to see it a different way. Just go back to the sideline and maybe talk to Masoli and talk to the coach, but don't sit there and walk up the field and, mutter to yourself the whole way to the sideline, because it just looks childish.
They were even able to shut down Tolliver here as well. Of course, Duron Carter had that assignment, 3 catches on 23 yards. And Carter actually made an interesting tweet as well last night saying that, hey, I know just as much as you. I want to be playing offense as well. So I thought that found that interesting from Duron.
Well, that's what everybody wants to play offense. You want to be the one scoring the touchdowns, not trying to defend the pass, because it's not that much fun, I find, when I got to play defense.
Well, he doesn't get to touch the ball as much.
No, right? And I think he if he wants to play offense, he obviously does. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen eventually. He'll be moved back once they can sign a DB that can play that corner spot. But until then, I guess it's going to be what it's going to be. But if he's still willing to, show up, and it's not like he's refusing to play the position. He's helping the team, and I think that's the bigger picture, is that he's engaged and willing to do this work because the team needs him to.
It was nice to see 2 return touchdowns, Christian Jones for the Riders, Frankie Williams for the Tiger Cats, and quickly John White, 12 carries, 55 yards and a touchdown, 11.5 fantasy points here. After all John White has been through the injury troubles with the Eskimos, it's nice to see him have a nice game here for the Tabbies.
For sure, and he was the leading fantasy point getter, almost. He's 0.2 behind Jalen Saunders. So, nobody had a really great game on the Hamilton side of football, but it was nice to see John White, get involved, get a touchdown, get some carries. And, he looked good. And, if he can stay healthy, that he can be a big part of this offense.
And it'll be really nice to see what the Tiger Cats do here. Of course, Luke Tasker didn't play, so they got to work him into the offense, and Chris Williams too. So I think the Tiger Cats offense gets a lot more potent from this point forward. Now, I think we go to Friday Night Football. I think it's safe to say that this one was the game of the week. Can we call it that?
Did I not say that it would be on Wednesday?
I think you did, actually.
Yeah.
So
weird. I hate it when I'm right. It's the worst.
No, you don't. You love it.
Yeah, you're right.
So Ottawa beats the Lions 29-25. Ooh, here's that big Greg Ellingson catch in the fourth quarter and that game-winning drive.
Excuse me. Harris going over the top, and it's caught by Ellingson. Oh, what a catch at the right time. Captain Clutch. Clutches that.
Speaking of that game-winning drive, my fantasy team, I spent a lot of money on William Powell, and I was worried. We need to talk about Jordan Herdman, middle linebacker for the Lions. Of course, Solomon Elimimian is hurt for BC, and I guess his Jedi apprentice, Jordan Herdman, looks a lot like Solomon Elimimian out there. The guy had an amazing game.
Yeah, and when you can, they shut down William Powell, like 50 yards, like from William Powell. That's low. That's not a great night for him. And we thought BC would have trouble with their run defense with Elimimian out, but Herdman filled in admirably, and they had a chance to win this game. Just couldn't get it done, but the defense was not as bad as we thought it was going to be with Elimimian on the sidelines.
Now, in the first half, things were going back and forth. They were quite close. Maybe BC controlled things a little bit. And you know what? They could have controlled it even more. It turned out being pretty big in this game. But did you see that penalty Odell Willis took in the first half after the Lions had Ottawa pinned deep? He basically, of course, in the East Division, The benches are on the same side of the field. Odell goes off. He's on the Ottawa sideline, and it didn't look like he was causing trouble, but he ended up getting an unsportsmanlike conduct, extended Ottawa's drive. All Ottawa got on that drive, I think, was a field goal. And Lewis Ward goes 5 for 5. I mean, those jerseys should be flying off the shelf in Ottawa. But Odell Willis getting in trouble from Wally Buono. It's been a long time since I've seen Buono get that fired up.
And that I missed it, but I had it recorded. And I went back and was able to watch some of that. I did miss that part, but yeah, when Wally gets mad, it makes for great TV.
Well, and Odell gets back onto the field. He ends up getting a sack. And how many sacks in Odell's career? I think he's got 90 of them now. Did he not celebrate at all? He knew he was in trouble from the Godfather. He just walked off the field. He's like, I did my job. Hopefully Wally's okay with me now.
Yeah, totally redeem yourself. Don't want to mess this up.
Yeah. But BC took another bad penalty late in this game. It was second down, of course. A time count violation inside 3 minutes is a loss of down. I think it was second and 7. They were threatening. They were inside the 15-yard line. They take that penalty, and I know a lot of people say if you go back and watch it that, hey, they did get the ball off, but they got the penalty, and it was third down, and that was the moment where Ottawa was able to get that ball back and drive down the field and win the game. So Brad Sinopoli, we thought a few weeks ago, I think it was against Montreal, had his biggest game of his career. Well, he tops it here. It seemed like Harris was throwing to him every play.
And why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
He was on a heater, and, there's no reason to go away from him. Yeah, 171 yards on 11 catches and a touchdown. Ends up with 34.1 points.
Wow.
Not the most expensive wide receiver out there, and I bet you his own rate. I don't know if his own rate would be that high.
He's not flashy, but he's definitely the best Canadian receiver in the league right now.
He might be the best Canadian quarterback as well.
Give him the ball, Ottawa. Look, that's a natural backup right there.
Absolutely.
The Manny Show puts on a show, 152 yards on 5 catches. So it's possible that you had Sinopoli, Arsenault, and Andrew Harris all on one team, and you're a happy camper.
Oh, for sure. I had Arsenault in my original lineup, so that kind of backfired when I took him out and put Brian Burnham in. But, nice to see. We're before Labor Day, and Arsenault comes out with a 152-yard game and a touchdown, 26.2 points. Maybe he's turning it on a little early this year. I think that he's a slow starter, like we've said, but I mean we're not going to see games like this all the time. At least 5 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown would be nice to see early on in the year, but just not quite getting that. But I mean this. If you had Arsenault in your lineup, you're pretty pleased with that output.
It was a nice game for Brandon Rutley as well. He had 17 carries, 91 yards, and a touchdown, 16.5 fantasy points, but he ends up leaving the game early. The Lions, I guess they got to hope that Jeremiah Johnson is good to go, because that ended up being a pivotal moment in the game as well. Rutley leaves, and they're having to go with Raleigh Lumbala, and I love Raleigh, but he's not an every down back in the CFL. He's your fullback. So hopefully the Lions have their running backs get healthy in a hurry, I guess.
Yeah, anytime you have an injury, it'll affect more aspects than just their position. But when it's a running back, Lule is not as agile as he once was. He's not going to be rushing a lot, and you want to establish that run. You're gonna need your running backs to be healthy and be able to carry the football.
Deontay Spencer has gotta be a little bit of a concern for those in Ottawa now.
Yeah, he's not having the best production offensively, but I noticed that even on his punt returns, he had 136 return yards this week, but it just seemed that his I don't know. I don't think he's lost a step or anything. He might have, but we're not seeing the return yards either that we're accustomed to from Deontay.
Yeah, I don't know if teams have gotten a bit more tape on him as well, but I think if for the Red Blacks to succeed, they need him going on the offense as well. We go to Toronto, the first game of a back-to-back with the Bombers here. I guess we just feature one of Andrew Harris's touchdowns.
Easy touchdown. Andrew Harris has 2 on the day. And once again, like his first touchdown, though he carried the mail, he goes in untouched.
This is crazy to say, but 167 yards, the most Andrew Harris has ever rushed for. He smashed the Argos in this game.
Yeah, and 16 yards on his 2 catches. He was so dominant. We're used to seeing that against BC and Edmonton. Like we said, Toronto has injuries up front in the linebacker core. So him being able to, if he can get through that, it's a chance for a big game, and we saw that on Saturday. He's also now he can hit 1,000. He needs to average 32.5 rush yards and 70 receiving yards for the rest of the year to hit 1,000. He's on pace right now for 1,830 rushing yards. So if he doesn't hit 1,000, if he doesn't hit 1,000, there's still a chance he could be looking at 2,000 rushing yards.
Wow.
Yeah.
he might be in the conversation for MOP right now.
Absolutely. I don't see how he wouldn't be.
If he averages over 100 rush yards a game, that's Mike Pringle numbers, man.
Yeah, it'd be something it's gonna be quite the rate. Like if there's let's say if he's got 100 yards or 110 yards left and it's the last week, does O'Shea keep him in until he gets it and then pull him? If they've already locked up a home field advantage, like that, it's gonna be a story when we get late in the year for sure.
And hopefully he stays healthy. We're only this far into the season here. When Harris gets the ball this amount, we have seen him miss a few games here and there because he's just such a workhorse. He gets the ball so much. We've seen them kind of use Nick Dembski a little bit to give Harris a break. And without Timothy Flanders, it's almost like Dembski is in that role, and he might sneak into flex consideration for your fantasy team. He had 5 catches and 62 yards. He added 10 rush yards as well. His day probably looks a lot better if he didn't have that fumble.
Oh, for sure it does. Still manages to get 12.2.
Yeah.
Not very expensive. Get him into your flex spot, and you probably had a pretty decent week.
Now, if you took Matt Nichols, you're happy. He's a cheap quarterback, 19 of 27, 245, 2 touchdowns. He had a rushing touchdown as well. It's a good week.
Yeah, I am happy that I have him in my lineup. That's a good point. He played well. 245 yards. It's not flashy numbers, but we don't expect flashy numbers from Matt Nichols. He made sure that his team had a chance to win the game, and having Andrew Harris with 2 touchdowns and all the rushing yards he had helped. But it's just another game, another week where Matt Nichols doesn't have the flashy numbers, but gets the job done, and that's what he does.
It's easy to do behind that offensive line. If you look at the numbers, and we talked earlier in the show about roster turnover and everything like that, that offensive line has basically been the same 4 or 5 guys for the last almost 2 years now. So when you're able to make that happen, an offensive line, those guys are playing off of each other. They need to be familiar with the guy next to them, and you're seeing the results of that in Winnipeg, although last week was a different story in BC. So we'll see what happens next week against Toronto. But as far as Winnipeg still goes, no catches for Adarius Bowman. He did have a bad drop in this one. I'm beginning to wonder if we're at the end of the road.
Yeah, when I was looking at the stat sheet, I was like, really? Again? I think this is the 3rd game this year where he doesn't have a catch. And, he's supposed to be the big free agent guy they brought in. You look at years that he had in Edmonton with Mike Riley, and it doesn't make any sense. But I don't know if it's starting to drop off or if he's just struggling right now. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But three games this year with 0 catches. It doesn't look very good.
We do need to talk about that Toronto offense, which looks absolutely horrible. Now, the Bombers, they actually let Toronto stay in this game longer than they probably should have. But one was a Kevin Fogg fumble on a punt. That got returned for a touchdown. Another one was a defensive touchdown. So the offense did nothing in this game. James Franklin, 21 of 36 for 151. He has an interception, 5 rush yards. We will not talk about my fantasy team again because I thought James Franklin, judging by what he did against the Eskimos last week, almost 300 yards, would be able to put up similar numbers against the Bombers. He did not. And I think a big part of that has to be James Wilder Jr. It was in the third quarter. They showed the graphic on TV. I think at that point, Andrew Harris had 114 rushing yards. JWJ -2.
And that's where he ended.
That is insane. That can't happen.
No. And even with that, he can still hit 1,000 as well.
Oh, come on.
He needs to average 67.7 rush yards and 59.3 receiving yards the rest of the year. That's doable.
If he does it with this game, that would be impressive.
Yeah. But yeah, that is not the James Wilder Jr. that we're accustomed to seeing. But, that Winnipeg defense, we talk about it all the time, how it's bend, don't break, but, they'll have games where they step up and absolutely shut teams down, and they did that on Saturday night.
Yeah, and late in this game, the Argos lost Chris Van Zyl, veteran offensive lineman. That's not going to help their rush game as well. But the receivers here, I took S.J. Green as well, 3 catches on 9 yards. But S.J. doesn't have any help, man.
No.
There's nobody else there with him. The Argos, I'm sure I've said it before this season, they probably have the weakest receiving core in the CFL. Montreal's there too.
Yeah, it's a tight race. SJ 3 catches, Noel 3 catches, 16 yards, Monty Edwards 3 catches, 29 yards. Nobody. I don't know if a product of it too is going to be it's James Franklin, not Ricky Ray, right now. So that doesn't help. That'll affect the receiving core a lot. That being said, you need to make plays when you're given opportunities, and they did not.
Well, let's move on to the final game of the week. We got in the worst argument of all time on the last show. It was yes, no, yes, no.
And I believe I was right again.
Hey, you know what, man? Montreal stuck around in this game. You admit it, more than you thought they would.
Oh, definitely.
And this game, I don't know if it is Calgary playing down to the level of their opponent or Bo's injury is, I think, more serious than they're letting on. Now, if you watched Bo in this game, he didn't move much. And that might be a problem next week against Saskatchewan. That might just be me getting my hopes up. But in Regina, 2 wins in a row. That crowd is going to be rocking here. Bo struggled a little bit in this game. In the first half, not so much. I think they got off to a 19-1 lead or something like that. So the Alouettes blew a 1-0 lead. I don't know how, but
I have a theory.
But early in the game, it just looked like Eric Rogers, you cannot defend him. It seems absolutely impossible.
Monday, go!
4 for Jackson, 2nd and 6. Line, caught, touchdown! Eric Rogers, 3rd catch of the drive.
No, you can only hope to contain him. 113 yards on 9 catches and a touchdown, 26.3 fantasy points. He's become a must start, and we kind of felt that when he re-signed or came back to CFL, it was like, the year he had in 2015, he's got the opportunity to pick up right where he left off, and he has. He's in the conversation right now for one of the best receivers in the CFL.
Tyrell Sutton, he had an okay game, and he had 15.6 fantasy points, so you're okay if you took him, but he averaged over 4 yards a carry against the Calgary defense, which is not easy to do. He also had 52 yards on 5 catches. BJ Cunningham had a touchdown, which saved his day. Now, the Manziel news kind of changes this, but Schiltz, it looks like the offense has a little bit of hope when he's in there. He kind of makes things happen a little bit. He's a lot more mobile than Drew Willie, but we're living on borrowed time here for Matthew Schiltz. It's going to be Johnny's team right away, so that's kind of...
I would think so, yep.
Yeah, so it's kind of a moot point. Where I wanted to go here was in the second half, the Montreal defense kept the Owls in this game. Of course, the offense couldn't do anything against Calgary, but the Stamps were repeatedly given incredible field position that they could not capitalize. It's almost like they probably should have won this game by 35 or 40 points, but the Owls defense really made it more respectable than it should have been.
Well, and I've been banging that drum for the last 3 weeks. Like, on paper, that defense should be way better than what they're playing.
They got some talent there. They got Mwamba. Now they lost Westerman, so I think that's a big loss. But Tommy Campbell had his interception in this one, the first one as an Alouette against his old team, so that had to feel good.
Oh, I guarantee, like, when you play, especially your first game against your old team, you get amped up and you make a play like that, and it's like, yeah, I can still play football. I don't know why you guys didn't want me.
Yeah, well, he went for the money, and I can't really blame him.
Oh, for sure. And I wouldn't even, if I was playing professional football, I wouldn't even care about winning. I would just take the money because you never know when your career is going to be over, and just cash those checks.
Yeah, winning's nice, but when you're on a CFL salary, you get those checks when you can, man.
Mm-hmm. And, like, one hit and your season or, your career could be over. So financial security would be trumping any winning for me.
Well, we saw that happen with Joe Burnett in this one. Longtime CFL veteran gets carted off the field. Leg should not point the way his leg was pointing, so it can all happen just like that. By accident, a lot of these things happen. So hoping for a speedy recovery for Joe Burnett. But we were talking about that Owls defense. They shut down Don Jackson. He had less than 50 yards rushing in this one, so they were able to key in on him. The Owls' defense looked really good, considering that the Stampeders had 10 more minutes of possession in this one.
Yeah, when you have the ball that much, you should be putting up big numbers. But yeah, for Don Jackson to get shut down like that I didn't see that coming.
So your highest scores in fantasy this week, Matt Nichols, Travis Lulay, the only quarterbacks to get over 20 points. It was kind of a rough week at that position. And
Matt Nichols was my starting quarterback this week, so I am pleased.
Oh, you're riding high, aren't you?
Yeah, I have third in the weekly standings this week and third overall now for the year in our group, so, I'm pretty happy with that.
Does that cure your hangover a little bit?
No. These leftover chicken nuggets should, though.
Sinopoli, Rogers, Arsenal. Well, Sinopoli, the highest scorer, period. Andrew Harris, second in that category. Then Eric Rogers, Manny Arsenal, both over 26 points. Marcus Thigpen, William Powell, they had good games as well. And, of course, the Calgary defense, they had 11 points. If you fit them into your lineup, you're happy. They were really expensive, though. Saskatchewan and Calgary both had 9 points. Man, how do you feel about not starting a defense and just maxing out everywhere else?
I don't like it because that's not how you play the game.
I agree, too. I feel, as a purist, I feel like you should fill your lineup, you dirty cheater.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you should. If you're not going to start a defense, would you do that? The only time I wouldn't do it is if, like, we play NFL fantasy football. If I'm up big and I got my defense playing on Monday night and the other guy doesn't have, and I've already won the matchup, he's got no players left, I'm benching my defense. Because
that makes sense.
Right? They give me negative points and I lose. Well, then yeah. But in a weekly, no, I fill it up because it's a salary cap, and you're kind of circumventing the cap at that point, are you not? Like, when Lou was in New Jersey and signed that 15-year deal for Kovalchuk.
It screwed the team. I'm a Devils fan. I don't know if I've ever said that on this podcast, but screw Kovalchuk and screw him getting back into the league.
It's the longest. If you can't beat him, join him. Loses the Stanley Cup final to L.A., leaves for 4 years or 5 years, and then comes back and joins L.A.
Oh, man. We've talked way too much about other sports in this one. But that does it for week 6. We'll be back on Thursday. I guess we'll know more about this whole Johnny Manziel thing by then. As you heard, Two and Out is now a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you like our show, we were just talking about hockey. There are some hockey podcasts on the network as well. So go check them out, the Fourth Line Podcast and Hockey Feels. I'm sure they will talk more about Kovalchuk than we will. You can find their show, our shows, and the rest of the members of the network at albertapodcastnetwork.com. Brazilian Ty will be back on Thursday. What game are you looking forward to next week? I think that Ryder Stampeder game could be something like 9-6.
Oh, don't. No, why do you got to do that to me?
You don't want an all-field goal game?
Do you?
Well,
I'd be okay. I'd be okay with all rouges.
Now that would be something. We could have a 4-3 game here.
Yeah, the Ottawa-Hamilton game. Both games on Saturday really I think are going to be the best games of the week. Edmonton should handle Montreal pretty easy, and if Winnipeg plays like they did this week, I don't think it's going to be much of a game on Friday night. But we can talk about that on Thursday.
Yeah, and you know what? Calgary gets their first West Division opponent of the season, so we will be talking about that. Of course, we're in the Canadian Football Podcast Network as well. Rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. We will talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. Find more great shows like this at CF Pod Network on Twitter.